Please, just $10, the little boy begged to shine the CEO's shoes when he said it was to save his mom. The city was alive with noise, horns blaring, footsteps clacking on concrete, voices rising and falling like wind between tall buildings. Winter had come early, painting the streets with a soft breath of frost. But on the terrace of an upscale cafe in downtown Manhattan, time seemed to move differently. Lucas Reed, 30, sat alone at a corner table, his espresso untouched, his gaze lost beyond the rim of his designer sunglasses. He wore success like a second skin, tailored coat, Italian shoes, a presence that made people glance twice. But behind the cool surface was a man quietly drowning in stillness. The world moved, but he didn't. He had come here, as he often did, not for coffee, but for a kind of silence that only existed in crowds, a paradox that matched the numbness he carried. His phone buzzed on the table. He didn't check it. Then a voice, small, trembling, unfamiliar, broke through the cocoon. "Please, sir, just $10. Lucas blinked, then looked down. A little boy, no older than 4, stood at his feet. His coat was too thin for the weather, his sneakers 2 sizes too big. In one small hand, he clutched a torn rag. In the other, nothing, just emptiness. "I'll shine your shoes," the boy said, trying to sound brave. "I don't need more, just enough to buy bread for my mom." Lucas didn't speak right away. He looked at the boy with a kind of detached curiosity, as if trying to decide if this was real or a performance. His shoes, shined that morning, reflected the boy's desperate eyes. "Where is your mom?" Lucas asked finally, his voice flat, unreadable. The boy hesitated, then pointed across the street. "She's over there. She hasn't eaten in 2 days." Lucas followed the direction of the tiny, dirt-streaked finger. At the edge of the block, beside a concrete planter dusted with snow, a figure sat slumped against the wall. She was young, barely more than a girl, maybe in her early 20s, with tangled blonde hair falling across her face. Her coat hung open, sleeves frayed. One shoe was missing. She didn't move. Lucas stared for a moment. Everything around him, cars, people, even the cold, fell away. The boy was still standing there, still holding out that rag, as if he'd learned this was the only way the world might look at him. There was no performance in his voice, only urgency and a strange kind of pride, as if begging wasn't an option, only work was. Lucas looked back at his coffee, now cold, then at the little boy's eyes again. They weren't just asking for money. They were asking to be seen. And somehow, for the first time in what felt like forever, Lucas Reed felt something stir inside him, something unexpected, unwelcome, but undeniable, something close to feeling. Lucas had seen poverty before. On TV screens, in annual reports, through car windows, but it had always felt distant. Now it had a face, a trembling voice, a cloth clutched in tiny fingers, and a woman collapsed under the weight of quiet sacrifice. Without a word, Lucas followed Eli across the street. The boy moved quickly despite the cold and his worn-out shoes. Around them, the city buzzed, horns honked, couples laughed, people passed by with coffee cups, unaware that a few steps away, life and dignity were unraveling. They reached the corner. There she was, slumped against a stone wall, bundled in layers that barely resembled clothing. Her head bowed, a young woman barely more than a girl, her blonde hair tangled, her lips pale. Lucas stopped cold. For a moment, he wondered if she was breathing. "Mommy," Eli whispered, dropping to her side. "I found someone." Lucas stepped closer, cautious. The woman didn't stir. Her knees were scraped, her skin ghostly, her dress torn, her coat threadbare. He watched for her chest to rise and finally saw it, faint, but there. "Alice," Eli murmured, stroking her arm. "Mommy, wake up. He's nice. He wants to help." Lucas hesitated. He'd come from a morning of boardroom negotiations and market forecasts. He had never done this before, but something about this woman, the fragility, the sheer abandonment, made him move. He took off his wool coat and gently draped it around her. Her body was ice. A faint groan escaped her lips as she stirred, barely turning her face. Lucas caught a glimpse of delicate cheekbones and lips edged in blue. "Who?" she rasped. "It's okay," Lucas said softly. "You need help. I've called for a car." "No, I don't." She tried to sit up, but collapsed again. He caught her before she fell, one arm around her back. Her body was feather-light. "You're going to a clinic," he said gently, but firmly. "Don't argue, just rest." Eli gripped his mother's hand, watching them with wide eyes. "She hasn't eaten since Friday," he said, voice small but clear. Lucas glanced at the boy, then back at the woman. "Alice," the boy had said. Her hand never let go of Eli's. Even in near unconsciousness, her grip was firm, not desperate, protective. A yellow cab pulled up. Lucas lifted Alice into his arms. She was weightless. Her head dropped softly onto his shoulder. Around them, strangers slowed, stared. Some pulled out their phones. Lucas ignored them all. He opened the door, helped Eli in, then climbed in with Alice still in his arms. "Prescott Urgent Clinic," he told the driver. "Fast. Triple fare." The driver nodded and took off. Inside the cab, Lucas held her upright, the coat wrapped tight around her. She murmured something, tried to shift. He hushed her. "Just hold on a little longer." Eli sat across, clinging to his mother's hand, eyes fixed on Lucas. "Are you a doctor?" the boy asked. Lucas smiled softly. "No, but I know someone who is. They'll help her." At the clinic, staff were already waiting. Nurses rushed out with a wheelchair. Lucas stepped out first, helped ease Alice into the seat, and held her upright as they wrapped her in a blanket. "She's malnourished," he said quickly. "She passed out from cold and hunger." "The boy's 4. Check him, too." Inside, the warm air hit them like a wave. People turned as Alice was wheeled in, her hair falling back, revealing a soft jawline and lashes fluttering weakly. Lucas stayed close to Eli, one hand on his small shoulder as the doors closed behind Alice. Eli looked up. "Will they fix her?" Lucas crouched to eye level. "They'll do everything they can, and so will I." One nurse behind the counter paused, watching the suited man kneeling beside a boy in tattered clothes. She blinked away tears. Outside, the city roared on, but for the first time in a long while, Lucas Reed had stopped, and something deep inside the cold, quiet chamber of his chest had begun to stir. The overhead light hummed softly above her, casting a cold glow over the sterile room. The faint scent of antiseptic clung to the air like a memory she couldn't place. Alice blinked slowly, her eyelids heavy, as if each movement took deliberate effort. Her body felt sluggish, as though her limbs were wading through water. For a few disoriented seconds, she couldn't quite recall where she was or how she had ended up here. Then she noticed the 4 in her arm, the pale blue blanket draped over her legs, and just beyond the glass window, a waiting area she didn't recognize. Panic bloomed in her chest. "Eli," she gasped, trying to sit up too quickly. A wave of dizziness surged through her. But before she could cry out again, a calm voice stopped her. "He's right outside. He's safe." Startled, she turned her head. A man was seated near her bed, quiet, composed, hands clasped between his knees. He wasn't wearing a coat, only a simple sweater, and though his posture was relaxed, there was something unmistakably steady and assured in the way he sat. His presence filled the room, not with noise, but with an unusual sense of quiet control. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse and dry, her eyes narrowing. "Are you with the city police?" "No," the man replied gently. I'm just someone who saw your son trying to shine shoes for $10 to buy bread." The words landed like a stone in her chest. Her lips parted slightly, stunned, as her thoughts scrambled to catch up with her surroundings. "I followed him," he continued softly. "To you. You were unconscious. I called for help. That's all." Alice leaned back slowly, still guarded, her fingers tightening around the edge of the blanket. "Why would you do that? Help us, I mean." He looked at her without blinking. "Because I could." She let out a breath, half bitter, half weary. "People don't just help like that. Not here. Not in this city." "I know," he said quietly. "But your son looked at me like I was his last hope." Her eyes flicked toward the window again, softer now. "He's all I have." The man stood. "Would you like something to eat?" "He's already had something, but I can bring you something warm." "No," she said quickly, instinctively. "No money, no handouts." "This isn't charity," he replied, not missing a beat. "It's a meal. You nearly didn't wake up." She looked down, the shame rising slowly like heat in her face. "We hadn't eaten in 2 days. I gave him everything. I just needed to make sure he had a chance." Lucas didn't speak. The silence that filled the room wasn't cold. It was still, and it waited. Then she looked back at him, and with a voice lower now, more certain, she said, "I used to be a psychology major. Top of my class. I had this dream of opening a center for kids, ones who'd been through trauma. I even interned at a crisis shelter for children during college. I was going to make a difference." He tilted his head slightly, as if he could already see the version of her she was describing. "What happened?" he asked gently. Her lips quivered as she tried to form the words. "I fell in love. He was older, said everything right, made me believe in a future. When I told him I was pregnant, he vanished. No calls, no answers, just gone." She paused, swallowing hard. "And when I told my parents, they didn't even get angry. They just looked at me like I was already gone. Said I had ruined everything. Said I had to leave." Lucas listened without interrupting, his gaze unwavering. "I tried shelters," she continued, her voice steadier now, not from strength, but from survival. "Most were full, some weren't safe, so I kept moving. Took whatever jobs I could find, cleaning houses, folding laundry. Some nights we slept in the back pews of churches, some nights on benches at train stations with him curled up in my coat." She looked down again, hands resting on the blanket. "But I always told myself, just one more day, one more dollar. If Eli was safe, if he had something in his belly and a warm hand to hold, then it was enough." Lucas's chest ached with something he hadn't felt in years. This woman, pale and trembling beneath hospital lights, radiated a strength that humbled him more than any executive he'd ever known. "I'm sorry," he said at last, voice low. She gave a small, weary smile. "Don't be. You didn't put us here." "No," he agreed. "But I've spent a long time walking past people like you. Maybe it's time I stopped." Just then, the door creaked open, and Eli stepped inside, a small paper bag clutched in his hands. His face lit up the second he saw her. "Mommy, they gave me bread. Real bread." He hurried over, climbed onto the bed, and wrapped his arms tightly around her. Alice flinched slightly but drew him close, burying her face in his hair. "You saved me some," she whispered into his curls. He nodded proudly, opening the bag to reveal half a sandwich and a roll. "I saved the best piece for you." She took the bread, eyes never leaving his face. But as she raised a piece to her lips, her hand began to shake, and her breath caught. A quiet sob escaped, and she turned her face away. Tears slipped down her cheeks, soft and steady. Lucas turned slightly, offering her privacy. But then he heard Eli whisper gently, "Mommy, it's okay. We're safe now. Alice nodded, wiping her eyes, and kissed her son's forehead. And in that fragile moment, arms wrapped around a boy who had seen too much, she smiled. Lucas Reed finally saw it, not weakness, not failure, but something fierce, something holy, love, raw, unfiltered, and still standing. And something in him, something that had long been buried, broke open and began quietly to breathe. The offer came quietly, without ceremony. Lucas stood by the hospital window, arms folded, as Alice packed up the few donated supplies the clinic had given her and Eli. She looked pale but stronger. Eli was spinning in a circle, humming to himself. I have a place, Lucas said softly. An empty guest apartment. You could stay there until you get on your feet. Alice froze, then looked at him sharply. We'll be fine. We always are. I know you will, Lucas said calmly. But your son deserves a warm place to sleep while you figure out your next step. No strings, just a roof. She hesitated, the stubbornness in her posture softening. She looked at Eli, then back at Lucas. Only for a few days, she said. Just until I find something. Lucas nodded. As long as you need. The apartment was on the top floor of a high-rise in Midtown, modern, minimalist, and used for months. It had 2 bedrooms, a kitchen stocked with groceries, and a wide window that looked out over the sparkling city skyline. Alice had never stepped foot in a place like it. This is too much, she whispered as they walked through the space. We don't belong here. Lucas placed a set of keys on the counter. You do now, at least for a while. That night, Lucas returned to his own penthouse, just 3 floors up, but he didn't sleep. He stood by his own window, staring out into the dark, and memories he had buried for years began to surface. Her name had been Claire. She was a writer, a dreamer. She loved rainy days, handwritten letters, and always carried a leather-bound journal in her purse. They had met by accident in a bookstore and never spent a day apart after. He had promised her everything, love, security, the future. She had only asked for one thing, time. But Lucas had been building his empire. And on the day he signed the merger that made him one of the youngest tech CEOs in the country, she had been on her way to surprise him with a gift. A small box with a pen engraved with the words, "You're enough." Even without success, she never made it. A driver ran a red light. Her car was crushed. The gift was found in her bag, unopened, untouched. Lucas had arrived at the hospital too late. He had never forgiven himself, not for missing the call, not for prioritizing a deal, not for thinking there would always be more time. Since that day, he had shut off the part of himself that dared to love, convinced he was cursed to destroy anything pure that touched his life. But now there was Alice and her son, and something in their presence, raw and unpolished, began to erode the walls he had built around his heart. Over the next few days, Lucas found himself stopping by the guest apartment more often than necessary, sometimes to drop off groceries, sometimes to bring children's books, sometimes just to hear Eli's laugh echo through the high ceilings. Alice remained guarded. She insisted on doing her own cleaning, cooking her own meals, and kept to herself. But slowly, cautiously, they began to share small parts of their lives, over cups of tea, over laundry folded together, over quiet moments when Eli was asleep. One evening, Lucas returned from a late meeting and stopped by to check in. The door was ajar. He stepped inside quietly, expecting to find the apartment dark. Instead, he heard laughter, light, melodic, unfiltered. Eli was on the floor, wrapped in a blanket like a superhero cape. In front of him, Alice sat cross-legged, holding 2 sock puppets. She made the puppets dance and speak in ridiculous accents, spinning a tale of a brave little boy who saved a city with kindness. Her golden hair was pulled back, her face illuminated by the soft light of the lamp. She was smiling, really smiling, not the tight-lipped, cautious kind she wore in public, but the kind that transformed her entire face. Lucas stood in the doorway, watching unseen. And for the first time in years, he smiled, not politely, not professionally, but deeply. As if a crack had finally appeared in the armor around his chest, and light was slowly seeping through. He turned away before she could notice, quietly closing the door behind him. Back in his own apartment, he leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. Something was changing, and for the first time in a very long time, he didn't want to stop it. It started with the little things. Alice, though still guarded, had begun to treat the guest apartment like a temporary home. She kept everything tidy, cleaned meticulously, and prepared small, warm meals that filled the space with comfort. Lucas would find soup simmering on the stove when he stopped by, or freshly folded laundry left in the shared hallway. Eli's drawings appeared on the fridge, crayon worlds filled with monsters, stars, and a smiling man in a suit holding hands with a woman and a child. Lucas began noticing the small moments, the way Alice touched Eli's hair when he fell asleep in her lap, the calm tone she used to explain the world's complexities to her son even when it hurt, the way her laughter lit up a room, though she still rationed it like it might run out. He began to crave those glimpses, not just of her, but of what it felt like to be near her, to be part of something so unpolished and real. One sunny Saturday, Lucas invited them to the park. Just a simple outing. Eli ran toward the playground with the boundless energy only a 4-year-old could possess, and Alice followed, pulling her coat tighter around herself. Lucas brought a camera. "Can I take one of you, too?" he asked as they sat on a bench, Eli's face covered in chocolate from an ice cream cone. Alice smiled shyly. "Sure, but only if you're in one, too." So they took one together, Lucas in the middle, Eli on his knee, Alice beside him. Eli called it their pretend family photo. And yet, looking at it later, Lucas couldn't remember ever being in a picture that felt more like home. One afternoon, he returned early from work and found the apartment unusually quiet. He called out softly, and no one answered. He was about to leave when he noticed something strange. His wallet was on the kitchen counter, left open. He stepped closer. Inside, folded neatly, was a $50 bill, the same bill he had slipped into Alice's bag earlier that week, hoping she wouldn't notice. She had. Lucas swallowed hard, staring at it. She had returned it, without a word, no confrontation, no speech, just an action that spoke louder than anything she could have said. He sat down on the couch, holding the wallet in one hand, the bill in the other, and felt his chest tighten. It wasn't pity that filled him. It was admiration, respect. She didn't want to be rescued. She wanted dignity. She had chosen survival, but she carried it with grace. That night, after Eli had gone to bed and Alice sat reading on the couch, Lucas walked into the room holding a worn paperback novel. "I thought you might like this," he said, offering it to her. "It was my mother's favorite." Alice took it, surprised. "Thank you." He nodded and turned to leave. But inside the front cover, tucked between the pages, was a card. Alice didn't see it until later when she opened the book again. It was handwritten in Lucas's sharp but gentle script, "You deserve more than survival. You deserve to be seen, heard, and loved." She stared at the words for a long time, her fingers trembling slightly, and for the first time since they arrived in that apartment, she allowed herself to hope, not just for Eli, but for herself. The storm came without warning. It started with a knock on Lucas's office door one crisp morning, when the sky was still clear, and the city below his window hummed with routine. "Lucas," the receptionist announced, "Rachel's here." She said it's important. Rachel Langston, one of his oldest friends from college, now an investor in one of his tech ventures, breezed into the room in her usual stilettos and sharp red blazer. Her hug was practiced, her smile polished, but her eyes flicked around the space, curious and calculating. "I've been hearing rumors," she said, sitting casually on the edge of his desk. "You've gone domestic." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about? You taking in a homeless woman and her kid?" That's what the gossip says. I thought it was ridiculous until I saw them. In your building? Lucas's jaw tightened. That's none of your business. Rachel laughed. Come on, Luke. What's the plan here? Make her your pet project? Feel better about all that guilt you carry around? He stood, suddenly cold. Stop. But it was too late. Rachel had said enough, and Alice had heard it all. Unseen by either of them, she had come to drop off lunch for Lucas, a small container of soup she had made, wrapped in a napkin with a smiley face drawn in pen. She had been standing just outside the door. The words had cut deeper than she expected: pet project, homeless woman, guilt. Alice left the container on the reception table and walked out without a sound. Back in the apartment, she packed quickly. She didn't cry. She just moved, methodical, numb. She wrote the note slowly, her handwriting small and neat, then placed it on the kitchen counter. Thank you for saving me. But I don't belong in your world. Eli clutched his teddy bear, confused. Mommy, are we leaving again? She nodded. Just for a little while, sweetheart. Rain had begun to fall as they stepped out of the building, a slow drizzle that turned into a steady downpour. Lucas returned hours later, tired but eager to share an idea with Alice, an offer for her to lead a new community outreach project his foundation was launching. But when he stepped into the apartment, something felt wrong. It was too quiet. He called out, Alice, Eli. Nothing. Then he saw the note. He read it once, then again, and then he dropped into the nearest chair, the breath leaving his body. He sat still for a full minute, as if his mind refused to accept what his eyes had read. Then he moved fast. He grabbed his coat, bolted out the door and into the elevator, heart pounding. The rain was relentless now, soaking him within seconds as he ran down the street, calling her name, asking anyone he passed. Nothing. He checked the subway entrance, the bus stop, the corner bakery where Eli liked the blueberry muffins. Still nothing. His shoes splashed through puddles, his breath ragged. People stared, not recognizing the usually composed CEO, now sprinting like a madman through the rain. Finally, at the edge of a park, he spotted them, two small silhouettes huddled beneath the arch of a bridge. Alice sat holding Eli close, a single bag at her feet, her wet hair clinging to her face. Lucas stopped, heart in his throat. She looked up. Their eyes met. And for the first time in his life, Lucas Reed, man of deals, of dominance, of precision, didn't have words, just pain and a desperate, silent plea. Alice stood slowly, shielding Eli. Lucas took a step forward, then another, and finally, in the pouring rain, he whispered, "Please don't go." Rain streamed from the edges of the old awning, pooling into rivulets on the cracked concrete below. The sky was heavy with gray, and the streetlights flickered, casting long shadows across the alley. Beneath the narrow shelter of a closed flower shop, Alice sat curled against the wall, her arms wrapped tightly around Eli, whose small body shivered in his sleep. She had pulled the thin jacket over him, soaking herself in the process. Her hair clung to her face in damp waves, and her fingers were blue at the tips, but she didn't move. She couldn't. The weight in her chest was too much, of exhaustion, of disappointment, of that aching belief that she had done the right thing by leaving, even though it tore her apart. The sound of hurried footsteps splashing through puddles made her flinch. Lucas emerged through the rain, breathless and soaked, scanning the shadows until his eyes locked on hers. Relief flooded his features as he stumbled toward them, dropping to his knees just outside the shelter. Alice stared at him, stunned. He looked ruined. His tailored coat clung to him like a second skin, his hair plastered to his forehead, his chest rising and falling with a weight of desperation. She opened her mouth to speak, but he was already reaching out gently, without force, just a hand, trembling, offering connection. He knelt lower until his face was level with hers, and his voice cracked through the sound of the storm. You don't belong in my world, he said, eyes never leaving hers. You are my world. The words shattered something in her. She shook her head, tears welling up despite the rain. Lucas, you don't know what you're saying. You have a life, a name, a future, and I'm just. Don't, he said quickly. Don't you dare finish that sentence. She stared at him, lips trembling. You walked into my life when I thought it was already over, he continued, voice thick with emotion. You showed me what love really looks like, raw, selfless, fierce. You showed me what it means to fight for someone every single day, even when no one else is watching. Her breath caught in her throat. You taught me that family isn't built by wealth or convenience, Lucas said. It's built in sacrifice, in bedtime stories, in soup left at a desk, in watching someone care more for a child than for herself. She lowered her eyes, fighting the sob rising in her chest. I don't care about the world I came from, Lucas said. It felt like nothing until I met you. He reached out, his fingers closing gently around hers. I'm not asking you to come back because I feel guilty. I'm begging you to stay because I can't imagine waking up tomorrow without knowing you're close, without hearing Eli's laugh, without your quiet strength. Alice looked down at Eli, whose tiny hand gripped the edge of her shirt in sleep. Then she looked back at Lucas, and for the first time, she let go. Tears fell freely now, mingling with the rain on her cheeks. You mean that? She whispered. Lucas nodded. She leaned forward, her forehead resting against his, her fingers clutching his hand like a lifeline. And in the heart of a city that never stopped moving, they sat, two people soaked in rain and redemption, with a sleeping child between them, and a future unfolding in silence. He wrapped his arms around them both. She didn't resist, because somehow, in the storm, they had found home. 6 months later, winter had returned to the city. But this time, it felt different. Inside the newly renovated downtown center for single mothers, the warmth came not just from the space heaters, but from the people. Laughter echoed through the halls. Toddlers played in corners with worn but beloved toys, and the scent of coffee and hope lingered in the air. Alice moved gracefully through the building, clipboard in hand, her blonde hair now healthy and shining, pulled into a soft ponytail. She stopped to check on a young woman filling out an intake form, then crouched beside a toddler who had dropped his snack. Her kindness was effortless. She had become the soul of the place. Lucas watched from the hallway, smiling to himself. He had offered her the role. She had built it into something that mattered. It was never about charity. This was her calling, and it showed in every quiet gesture she made. At 3 p.m., Eli's voice rang through the front doors. Mommy. He ran into Alice's arms, backpack bouncing behind him. His cheeks were pink from the cold, his smile wide and unshakable. Lucas walked in behind him, coat dusted with snowflakes. He leaned down and kissed Alice's cheek. She smiled and took his hand. That evening, their small apartment, cozy, lived in, and filled with signs of a real life, was full of light. A few close friends from the center had gathered, and Eli ran around showing off his latest finger painting to anyone who would listen. The table was set simply, nothing extravagant, but everything that mattered was there. At the end of the meal, Lucas stood. I don't have a speech, he said, voice steady but laced with emotion. But I do have something I've wanted to say for a long time. The room fell quiet. He turned to Alice, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small velvet box. Her breath caught as he opened it to reveal a simple, elegant ring, nothing flashy, just right. He knelt on one knee. You once begged for $10, he said softly. Now, let me spend every dollar, every day of my life building a home with you. Alice covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. She nodded, unable to speak. Lucas slipped the ring on her finger as Eli clapped and shouted, Say yes, Mommy. She laughed through her tears. Yes. 1,000 times, yes. The room erupted in applause, but Lucas only saw her. Later that night, as the snow fell gently outside, they stepped out for a walk. Eli walked between them, holding their hands tightly, swinging his arms and humming a tune only he knew. They passed the cafe where it all began, the same sidewalk, the same corner. Only now it was no longer just a city street. It was the place where a boy's honesty, a mother's sacrifice, and a stranger's broken heart had collided to create something none of them expected, a family. And as they walked hand in hand, laughter rising into the night air, one thing was certain. Winter had returned, but for the first time in a very long time, it didn't feel cold at all. Sometimes it only takes a simple act of kindness, a $10 plea, to change the course of 3 lives forever. Lucas, Alice, and little Eli remind us that no matter how cold the world may seem, love has a way of finding its way back in through sacrifice, healing, and second chances. If this story touched your heart, imagine what the next one will do. Subscribe to Whispers and Word Stories for more true-to-life tales of love, resilience, and the quiet moments that change everything. And don't forget to like, comment, and share, because someone out there may just need a story like this to believe again. We'll see you in the next one.